And I'd like to introduce Margret, Viebrock, and Sandy Brown, and appreciate their time and energy for the Food Allergies at Camp presentation. So, ladies, take it away.
Okay, this is Margaret. We'll go ahead and get started. And Mike had asked us to do a presentation on how to deal with food allergies at camp. And so we're going to go through a series of PowerPoint slides here to talk about some things that you should be aware of, how you might handle them, and some of the ideas that we have. And I think that after we're done with this presentation, if you have any specific questions, of course, you can email both of us, and we'll take care of it that way. So Sandy, if you want to change the slide, please. So the first thing I want to talk about is who's coming to camp. And I would assume that that most camps have an official camp registration rather than just inviting people to come. But I do know that in some day camps, people open them up and they just invite people to come, and they don't do much in the way of registration. But part of what we're promoting here is what do you know about your campers, and what are you specifically asking on the registration form, other than their address and their name and that sort of stuff. But we think it's important to ask them about food allergies. So, do you have some specific food allergies? Sometimes in other places we've called it food preferences or a way of eating, but I think we really need to get down to the nitty-gritty and ask about, do you have any food allergies? And then you need to ask yourself, are you prepared to handle these food allergies, and how might you go about it? Next. And so on the next one, it's part of what we're talking about here is taking time to talk to the parents. So as I go on with my slides, we're going to talk about allergies, but we also have intolerances, and we also have a preferred way of eating. And so I think it's important to give that parent a call and ask about Susie, who they say, she can't eat this particular kind of food. And discuss those allergies with the parent and find out, what's really going on and how are they handling this eating at home. Are they cooking separate food for Susie? Is Susie just picking around the food that they have? How are they handling it? You might ask about any difficult situations that they've had at home. Has she had any allergic reactions? Is it kind of a hit and miss? I just get down a little bit more to the details. And then I think the big question to ask is does your child assume any responsibility for what they eat? And part of this is mom and dad taking care of everything, putting the food in front of them and saying, this is what you can eat, this is what the rest of us are going to eat. Don't touch this. Be sure you don't eat any of this when you go next door. And so find out what the child is doing themselves to be responsible and not to become ill from the food. Next. And so this one talks about, basically a little bit with food allergy backgrounds. And so the food allergy and research says that about 1 in 13 children suffer from food allergies. I think the statistics also say that about 1 in 20 adults suffer from food allergies. And just so that we're all on the same wavelength, that there is no cure for food allergy. It's simply that you need to avoid the food so that you don't have a reaction. And different people react different ways, but you simply avoid the food instead of saying, well, I'll try a little bit today or a little bit tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. And I've put on the screen pictures of probably what are the 3 main allergies that people are affected by, the 3 top ones being peanuts, milk, and eggs. And when Sandy does her list, there's several more, but a lot of times these are the main ones that people have an affliction with. Next slide. And so here we're going to talk about, what is a food allergy? And we're not going to go into any heavy science. We're giving you a little bit of a background, but we're also going to be looking at, what do you need to do? And so basically a food allergy is just the body's response to a harmful food. It might be harmful to that person who has that allergy, and it's not harmful to the rest of us. So what happens is very simple. The body triggers an immune reaction to the food to fight it. The body creates some antibodies to deal with the food. And then unfortunately, these chemicals trigger the allergic reaction. And so what kind of reactions can a child or an adult have? They can be a mild type of reaction. There's a whole list of them, but I'll start out just with the hiccups that might be a reaction to what a child might have. And the second one is they stop breathing. They just can't breathe, and they can't catch their breath. So that goes from mild to extreme. And so when severe, the recommendation is to call 911. It's easier to turn the ambulance back if the person gets better or they get into control, but don't plan to handle an allergic food reaction. Call 911, get them there as fast as you can, let them take care of it. Sometimes people have shots, and the recommendation is that you do not give a shot to a person. They may say, well, in my bag or in my purse, or probably with children, any shot type of medicine will be kept with the camp nurse. And so don't administer any of that unless you're a medical person. Call 911 and let them take care of it, because it could be a life or death situation. Next slide, Sandy. So the next one I want to talk about here is it always an allergy? And the answer is no. So some people may say, I have an allergy to a certain kind of food. I can't eat this food for one reason or another. And so that's why it's important that you talk with the parents to find out, really what is bothering that child. And so the category I want to talk about here is having a food intolerance or a food sensitivity. And this is entirely different. It isn't like that we talked about with a food allergy where the body goes into a fight or flight type of situation. This is just a negative physical reaction to the food. And again, this can be headaches. We talk about people who might get migraine headaches when they eat aged cheese. People may get hyperactive. They may start vomiting. They get joint pain. They can get rheumatoid arthritis. Or they can even get a rash all over their body because they have a sensitivity to a certain kind of food. There's probably 4 major diseases that are associated with this intolerance, and I've listed them there as asthma, eczema, hay fever, and celiac, which we're going to talk about specifically. And so when someone puts on their paper that they're allergic to gluten foods, remember, that's not an allergy. That is a food intolerance or a food sensitivity. Now, in the big scheme of things, does that matter? I'm not sure that it really matters in the fact that they've told you, you visited with them, and you found out, what you need to do to take care of it. And so let's move on to the next slide. And here we're going to talk about celiac disease. And once again, it's not a food allergy. It's a lifelong inherited autoimmune condition. When sometimes people go a long time through their life and they never find out that the reason they felt so terrible all the time is because, or they had a lot of symptoms connected with it, is because they were allergic to gluten. And so what happens is gluten is present in a variety of foods, and it causes damage to the small intestine, and it causes food not to be absorbed. So a lot of times people who have celiac disease just feel bloated, and they can't eat, and they can't go to the bathroom. And so it just affects both ends of the body. And so when you're looking for foods for somebody who has celiac disease, if it says wheat-free, that does not mean it's gluten-free. And so it's important that you look for food labels that say gluten-free. And I've put a label there on the screen so you can see what the words look like on on containers that you would buy that say gluten-free or 100% gluten-free, or what it might look that way. But remembering, and Sandy will go into this a little bit more, is cross-contamination can happen very easily with someone who needs to eat something that's gluten-free. You don't use the same utensils, you don't use the same work surfaces. If you're putting out bread for making sandwiches and the children are making their own sandwiches, you don't reach into the sack and pull out the bread for the person who does not have celiac disease and the one who does, because you've cross-contaminated with your same gloves, with your knives, with your cutting boards, or that sort of thing. And so when you're preparing gluten-free food, it must be done separately from other food. It can't be done in the same place at the same time. Sometimes the easy choice when you're looking for gluten-free is to simply choose foods that indicate they are gluten-free. It takes a lot of the guesswork out, and in a lot of the camps that we have, people are not trained to look at a lot of labels and figure things out. And we'll talk about some of those things in a moment, but choosing a gluten-free product makes life a lot easier. Otherwise, you're having to read every package of what you're serving, particularly those things that are pre-boxed or not whole foods that you're buying. And so gluten is a common name for protein that's found in specific grains, and they're found in all kinds of wheat, all forms of wheat. So remember, wheat-free is not gluten-free when it comes to choosing foods for someone who indicates that they are, they do have this, people call it an allergy, but basically it's an autoimmune condition that you have for your lifetime, and it never really gets cleared up. You just learn to eat differently. Next slide. So the other thing that I've experienced when I've done workshops and I've asked people when they fill out their registration form about eating preferences is that, we talked about allergies and we talked about intolerances or sensitivities. Then it comes down to eating preferences. Sometimes people just choose to eat a certain way. And more people are choosing to eat gluten-free. There's nothing medically wrong with them at all. They don't have celiac disease, but they've chosen to eat gluten-free. And sometimes they like the results that they get because a lot of times by going gluten-free, they're eliminating carbohydrates from their diet, and typically a person loses weight. So they like the after effect of going gluten-free, but it's a preference of how they eat. Some people have a preference for soy. They may not be allergic to milk, but they only want a soy product. I find that people say, well, I can only eat food that's organically grown. Well, it would be a very difficult situation to handle. First of all, expensive to get organic food into camp, but organic has some different terminology of figuring out truly what is organic. Then other people will say, I want a low-carb diet. I want no carbs. And sometimes the carbs relates to the gluten-free. And so these are all eating preferences. And so as a manager for a camp, or you're a camp cook, or you prepare the food, is talking to those parents again will help you figure out, is it an eating preference, is it an intolerance, or is it truly an allergy that someone has that we have to deal with. So I'll stop there now, and Sandy's going to go into the next slides, but I'd certainly entertain any questions that somebody has. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Sandy, and she can go ahead with her slides.
Alrighty, well, the part I'm going to talk about is what the top 8 food allergens are, and you can see them listed here. They're milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, wheat, and soy. And as Margaret said, milk, eggs, and peanuts are our top 3 food allergens. So milk is number one. A lot of people think that peanuts are number one because we see more severe allergy reactions to peanuts, but really milk is the number one food allergen out there. Part of the reason I think people think it's peanuts is because, as Margaret alluded to, it's the proteins that we're allergic to, and there's a higher percentage of proteins in the peanuts than there are in other things, so the reactions tend to be a little bit more severe. So 90% of the food allergies are in these particular 8 foods. So these are the ones you want to be most concerned about, but of course you're always going to entertain all of the food allergies, intolerances, or preferences that are put on the forms that the parents fill out when you take your camper registrations. So the food labels, it's best for you to look at the food labels then to see what is in the foods. That's your best way to know, am I preparing a food that doesn't have one of these food items? Because many times the food items come by a different name. So when you're looking at a label, for example, you might be looking for wheat or eggs or milk, but you might see other kinds of words like flour. Well, flour, is that a whole wheat? Is it a corn flour? Is it a rice flour? We don't know. So you have to look for some specific words that you're looking for as far as allergies is concerned. And oftentimes some of these ingredients hide in places that you wouldn't think of. And so they might hide in foods that, like, I never realized that milk was in that kind of food. Or that there was soy in this kind of food. So you kind of have to start familiarizing yourself with what are some other names for that particular food product, and then where might they hide. Mike has a handout that he's going to share with everybody if you're interested. And what that handout is what are the other names for some of these foods, and where might these foods be hidden. And so on this slide, it shows you an example for milk. So on the left-hand side, you'll see all the list of other names you could see in the ingredient list that would contain milk. So someone with a milk allergy would want to be concerned with caramel, or with something that says high protein flavin. That doesn't say milk to me, but if I have a milk allergy, I'm going to look for those kinds of words on the ingredient label. And on the right-hand side, then, there is a list of where you might find milk products. So yogurt and custards and puddings, frozen desserts, sauces, things like that you might think of, but I wouldn't have thought about hot dogs or meatballs or Spam. So, and sometimes lunch meats might have some kind of milk or dairy in them as well. So, so I hope that this handout would be helpful to you to start learning what some of the other names or hidden sources for some of these foods are. So if you have a camper that comes in and says they have a milk allergy, or they have a peanut allergy or a wheat allergy, you could use this as a starting point for you as you're sorting through all your ingredient labels. So what are your responsibilities in camp then, or in the kitchen, when you're trying to prepare food for your campers and you have 10 or 15 of them, or even 2 of them that have a food allergy? I would suggest that you first create a food allergy team, or bring your team of cooks together and start looking at what those food allergies are. If someone has had a conversation with the parents, whether it's someone on the cooking team or whether it's a director or someone, but understanding as a team what are the allergies that are existing in your camp during that time, and then how are we going to approach that. So do we need to look at our menus and what foods have, let's say this camper has a milk allergy. Well, what kinds of foods are we going to have that might have milk in them? Are we serving pudding for dessert? Do we need to look at something else for a dessert? Do we need to start looking through some of the ingredient labels to make sure that we're not serving or using an ingredient in our recipe that might have milk in it? So identifying those foods that you serve that contain something that that camper might be allergic to, and begin reading labels. But it takes a little bit of planning, just like you plan what you're going to serve and how you're going to serve it and how much food you need to buy. Now you have to add another layer as to what foods do we have that don't have milk products in them, and do we need to add something else for that particular person, or are we good to go and we just avoid these 3 items? So I think creating that allergy team and kind of all talking and being on the same page is your number one kind of thing that you want to do before you get started. So as I said earlier, the major component that causes reactions, allergic reactions, are the proteins in these foods. So the proteins is what's going to cause the allergic reaction. And these proteins are not necessarily killed or eliminated by rinsing off something, by wiping it off, or by heat. So just cooking it, or if you had a tray that had milk spilled on it and you were going to put cookies out on it, you wouldn't just wipe it off with a paper towel till it's dry and then put the cookies on it if you've got somebody with a milk allergy that's going to eat those cookies. Because there could be some cross-contamination. So just wiping it off or rinsing isn't sufficient. So you have to wash and sanitize and remove all of the residue. As Margaret had mentioned earlier, someone that might have a gluten intolerance, you wouldn't take your gloved hands and take wheat bread out of the bag and put it out to make a sandwich and then use that same gloved hand to grab your gluten-free bread, because there could be cross-contamination of the of some of the residue or some of the crumbs off of the bread. In addition, proteins can be transmitted through vapor, steam, and residue. So vapor and steam seem to be important, because if you're boiling something and there's steam in the air, and then you're cooking something next to it on the burner, for the person that has a food allergy, that vapor or that steam could cross-contaminate into that other food. And then we talked about the residue, where there might be something left on a counter or in a pan or on your hands. So there's lots of places that there can be some cross-contamination, which we're most concerned about. And sometimes we don't think about the little places that things could happen. So our personal responsibilities then, each of us or each of you that would work in the kitchen, is where have your hands been? We all know that our hands get us probably in the most trouble because they get into the most places. So we have to be really aware of washing your hands regularly and well. You might even want to consider appointing one person that would be in charge of preparing, or one or two people that would be in charge of preparing or serving the food to the person with the food allergy. And again, this is going to depend on how severe the food allergy is. You know, if it's very severe, then you're going to have to be more stringent on your practices in the kitchen than if it was a slight allergy. But washing your hands regularly and well should be something you would do in the kitchen no matter what, but even more so when you're working with food that would be served to a camper with a food allergy. Be aware of your apron. Lots of things splatter on our aprons. Sometimes I've seen people where they'll go to a storage area and they'll grab eggs, or they might grab a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, and they'll put it in their apron and carry it because it's more than they can carry in their arms. And so then that's going to cross-contaminate onto your apron. And the other one is about towels, whether they're sanitizing towels, hand cloths, hand towels, whatever, is where have those been as well. Many times you'll see a sanitizing cloth sitting on the counter, or they'll put it over their belt because they're wiping down a lot of tables and not going back and re-rinsing that cloth. And so making sure and vigilant that those cloths stay in the sanitizing solution when they're not being used, and that they're rinsed well. And then, like I said, assigning a couple of people that might be in charge of working with the food that's going to be served to the camper with the food allergy. So when we talk about cleaning and sanitizing, then, it's suggested that you use a tablespoon of bleach to a gallon of cool or warm water. And this is the maximum. You can use a little less than this, but you don't want to use more than this. And again, making sure that it's cool or warm water so that you're not going to dissipate the strength of the sanitizing solution by using hot water. It's best if you spray or wipe the area down, and then let the area stand for 1 to 5 minutes. And this depends on what might be on the counter. So say you spilled an egg on the counter and you need to wipe it up, you'd probably want to leave that solution sitting there for a little bit longer than if it was crumbs of bread. It's best if you use paper towels, because by wiping it down with paper towels, you can throw that away. So any contaminant that's on that towel gets thrown away, rather than keeping it on a sanitizing cloth that then needs to be rinsed off. So if you're sanitizing a work area, it's best to spray the sanitizing solution on, let it stand for 1 to 5 minutes, and then wipe it down with a paper towel. You want to make sure you clean anything the camper might touch. Now, previously we've been talking about kind of the kitchen area and during the food prep, but also you need to think about where else is the camper going to be when they're consuming their food, or where there's food present. So the tables that they're going to eat at, including the edges and underneath the table. Any chairs, benches, seats, seat backs, anything like that. Because if there was a camper there that, say, ate a sandwich and had bread residue on their hands and they touched the seat or the table or the chair edge, you would want to rinse that or wipe that off. Same thing with a buffet line. If there's service in a buffet line and there could be some contamination on any of the areas around the buffet line, that area needs to be cleaned well with the sanitizing solution. If there's a spill, when you spill something, you're going to see the kind of immediate area that something spilled in, but it could splash outward. So make sure to look around and wipe up a wide swath of area if there's a spill. And did anything splash onto the legs of the chair or onto the seat of a chair, and making sure that you get the complete spill up. The other thing we need to think about is common use items. Again, this is kind of a cross-contamination thing with hands that might have touched, again, a sandwich or something along that line. Having a set of condiments like ketchup, salt and pepper, mustard, things like that. Normally, you might have them on the table where kids can grab them and put them on their sandwich, but you need to have a separate set of containers, or consider that, that are cleaned and sanitized for those that have an allergy. Again, this is going back to how severe is the allergy, what are they allergic to, how likely are those containers going to be contaminated when you're thinking about having separate set of the condiment containers. If you do bread baskets, placemats, tablecloths, table decorations, little containers that have jam and jelly in them, all of those kinds of things, consider how they've gotten there and how could possibly they've been contaminated where it might bother the camper. There's lots of stories out there about people who will open up a jelly container that was touched by someone who spilled their milk, and then the milk got onto that and it was just wiped down, and then the person allergic to milk had a reaction. And those are the little things that we oftentimes don't think about. So now we've cleaned all the areas and we've thought about all of the common items that people might be touching. Now we get into the preparation of food. And remember, we want you to review the labels. Suppliers oftentimes will change recipes. So even though you have a standard item that you've bought for years and years and years, how many times have we gone to the shelves and they've changed the packaging? So I'm looking for the red package and now it's blue, and it's new and improved, and it's 2 ounces smaller, but look at the label, they may have changed some of the ingredients. So making sure that the suppliers haven't changed their ingredients. Reviewing your own recipes and making sure the ingredients in the recipes are the same. This is where you can't have any secret recipes. People will sometimes bring their secret cookie or their secret casserole recipe, and it's got a secret ingredient that makes it so yummy, but they don't want anybody to know. This isn't the place to have those kinds of secrets, especially if you've got campers that have food allergies. Again, depending on the severity of the allergy, you might need to consider having a separate area where you prepare the foods for that particular camper or two. If it's someone that has celiac and they're really concerned about the gluten cross-contamination, this would be really important when making sandwiches, for example. Or in the mornings if you're making biscuits and you need to make some kind of a gluten-free kind of biscuit. You need to have separate areas, baking them in separate oven rotations. If you have 2 ovens, that'd be great. But making sure that they're prepared in a separate area. using pans or bowls or plates that are dishwasher clean, if you've got a dishwasher, but not ones that have just been wiped off. So sometimes there's an example where you've made something in a bowl and it really didn't make it dirty, and so you just wipe it out and you're going to redo it, or you're going to do something else in it. It doesn't have anything that's really contaminating, except it might have an allergen in it. So you want to make sure that whatever kinds of pans and bowls and plates that you use, whether it's for food preparation or for service, is that they're out of the dishwasher clean and not something that's just been rinsed off or wiped off. Never leave an allergy-free food near other foods. So this is, again, that vapor and steam kind of thing where you might put the food that's prepared for the camper that has an allergy next to a food that's prepared for a camper that doesn't have an allergy. And if there's any opportunities for cross-contamination, either setting them next to each other, or if you take plated food to them, that they're carried together, they need to be carried separately or even by separate people. We've talked about the steam lamp and steam tables already. I think if you do a buffet and you've got a steam table, be cautious about if you have fish sticks next to chicken and there's somebody that's allergic to fish, you're not going to want to have it on the same steam table next to each other in case there's some steam or vapor cross-contamination. The other thing is if you're going to deep fry something. So again, if you're going to fry chicken in a deep fryer, or if you're going to fry French fries, or you're going to fry fish sticks, if you've got someone there that's allergic to shrimp or shellfish or other kinds of fish, you would not want to use the same fry pan or the same fry oil as you would use for the French fries or something else. So making sure that those are in separate areas. And the same thing with breading. If you get shrimp or chicken that you're going to bread yourself or you're going to coat in flour, is that you use separate flouring or breading containers for fish versus chicken versus something else. So again, knowing what those allergies are and then making sure you've got separate prep areas and separate areas where you would be flouring and frying those particular foods. So we've got the food all prepared and now we need to serve it. So I think I alluded to this a little bit already about having different sets of trays and utensils for those campers. So they would have their own trays. It's depending on where you store the trays or the serving utensils. If they're going to be in an area where food prep is happening and there's any chance that there could be any splattering or anything like that, you may want to have a set of trays or utensils off in another area that wouldn't have a chance to be contaminated in that way, that would be used for that camper that has an allergy. It's best if you try to use separate utensils for serving food, that you're not using it for different kinds of foods. And then as a team, remember at the beginning I said to kind of plan out how you're going to address food prep and so on. You might also want to address how you're going to serve that camper. If you have a buffet line, do you let the campers with the allergy go through the buffet line first? Do you prepare their plates or serve them up? Are the foods in a separate area? Do you put the non-allergen foods at the beginning and then have a nice big separate area with the other kinds of foods? So just thinking about how they're going to be served and how they're, because you don't want to call them out necessarily, but on the other hand, you want to make sure that you can serve them so that their food isn't near where there might be foods that they could get contaminated with that allergen. So as far as utensils, if you are using a buffet line and you're transferring food from one container to the next, not using the same utensil to transfer multiple foods. Watching can openers. This is something I surely didn't think about, is that can openers, slicers, mixers, blenders, things like that that might be used for a variety of foods, really you need to have a separate one or have them washed really well before you're working with the foods for the camper with the allergies. When you're removing pans and containers from a buffet, sometimes you use tongs to pull it out of that buffet and it could get into the food. And you might use the same set of tongs to pulling out those foods. So again, being cautious that you're not using them with foods that are going to be a contaminant versus the ones that aren't. and then just trying to prevent foods from dripping onto others. And this is sometimes what would happen is if they're doing salad dressings, for example, and you have them stacked one in front of the other, and they're scooping one and it drips into another one. So there might be an oil and vinegar that would be fine, but there may be other dressings that have cream in it or have mayonnaise in it or something that would be a person with a milk allergy couldn't have. So you wouldn't want to have one food dripping into another just in general, but with the allergies, that could be a problem. And then when you're storing foods, think about how you're storing your foods and making sure that there's no cross-contamination in the storage area. Using utensils and plates that are fresh from the dishwasher, or maybe even have a separate location where you would store the foods for the camper that has the allergy. The other one might be about serving. I thought about packaging up cookies, for example, either to bring them to camp or when you have them left over, is that you don't put peanut butter cookies and oatmeal cookies and chocolate chip cookies in the same box to store them for the next day, especially if you've got a person with a peanut allergy. They're not going to want to have them next to the oatmeal cookie that they could probably eat. Or brownies with nuts and brownies without. And half the box has the nuts, half the box doesn't. They really need to be on separate plates for serving or separate storage containers. So the common areas then to just kind of review is some common areas for contaminants are places that aren't cleaned well enough, like tables, chairs, common use items like the ketchup, mustard, things like that. Storage and packaging areas, walk-in storage, multiple use containers, reusing kitchen equipment for multiple uses, prepping and staging areas, so making sure that you have an area where you can prepare the food for the camper with the allergies separate from the other. Making sure your cleaning and wiping cloths are sanitized and clean. Watching out for your apron, and then also the areas that have spilled product, making sure those are cleaned well. So to recap, the main things that you need to be concerned about is first coming up with that kind of team that you can kind of plan how you're going to do things. Remember, heat does not kill the proteins that trigger the allergic reactions, so therefore you can't just say, oh, let's heat the food up. Washing and sanitizing is the only way that you're going to get rid of those things off of the counters and tables and so on. Work as a service team, as I said. Have a plan for preparing, serving, cleaning, even where they sit. Now, depending on the severity of the allergy, they may have to sit, in a different spot than kids that are eating a lot of seafood, for example, if they have a seafood allergy. Now, you probably don't serve a lot of seafood at camp, but there could be the fish sticks or something, or tuna fish, things like that you might be serving, and you would need to know if there's a camper that's allergic to that, they can't be sitting near them maybe. And then most of all, be familiar with the names of the ingredients so that you can really be the detective around seeing if there's any foods on your menu or in your recipes that could cause an allergic reaction. So that was a quick overview of the things you need to consider. I guess I'm hoping that it just gives you some food for thought. All of these things might not fit you in your camp, but there might be one or two things that you can that you might need to do that would prevent a camper from getting sick and having a reaction. So at this point, I think we'll leave it open for questions for both Margaret and I.
One of the things that I've seen with camps is that they're already using colored bracelets, kind of the stretch bracelets, or swimming abilities and those kind of things. They've adapted those for a different color for medical and then for food allergies that you can wear. And so it's somewhat discreet, but a little bit, kind of obvious when they're going through a food line, but it at least alerts and then I think helps remind the campers themselves that there's some things that some choices they need to make in their food selections as well. So that's one of the things I've seen at some of the camps that I've had the opportunity to visit, and how they deal with the food allergies, and then kind of the due diligence of the cook staff in trying to make sure that there isn't a cross-contamination. But both of you brought up some really good points that I think would be helpful to camps.
One other thing I might mention is that, you hope that you wouldn't have any food fights, but sometimes that does happen. And we had one in one of our schools a couple of years ago where kids did get in a food fight, and one child smashed his peanut butter sandwich on another kid's face. And unfortunately, that second child was allergic to peanuts. And so it sent them to the hospital. And so kids may not know what other kids' allergies might be. And, can't control food fights sometimes, or when somebody gets angry at somebody else and takes it out in a different kind of way. So you might have to be conscious of that as well. And we don't like to call out kids and say, Johnny over here is allergic to this and Mary's allergic to that, so let's be careful. And part of that goes back to that thing I mentioned at the beginning, is asking the parent is, what responsibility does the child take for themselves?
Sure.
Is mom and dad always taking care of them and telling them what they can eat and what they can't eat? And if that's truly the case, then I think your camp cooks and your camp counselors, will have a struggle to keep it all straight. That.
The other thing is that there are more camps that I'm finding that are restricting homemade products coming to camp with the campers. So things that will, brownies, cookies, other things that will be in the cabins, not part of the food service. And part of that is due to the potential for allergic reactions. And unfortunately, some of that is due to the potential for marijuana edibles coming into camp.
Well, and I would think that it would not only be homemade things, but commercial products too, because if they're bringing, peanut M&Ms, or they're bringing a Snickers bar and you've got kids that are allergic to peanuts, that wouldn't be so great either. So I can see where bringing extra food in your cabin is going to be a tough one as well.
Yeah, and most camp cooks that I've run into tend to overbuy and have plenty of food. It's rare the time that a camp runs out of food. Usually they've got plenty more left over.
Mm-hmm. Well, the topic definitely adds another layer to being the camp cook, that's for sure.
It is not an easy job. Shannon, Lisa, any questions?
No, I don't have any. It was a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting.
Well, with that, Sandy, Margaret, thank you very, very much. Got a text message from Lisa. Lots of good information. Thanks. So again, I greatly appreciate your time and efforts to put this together. It's an important topic, and one that I think we'll be able to use your presentations for a number of camp seasons to help us think about what we need to do about food allergies at camp. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And remember, Mike has two handouts. One is the one that lists all the different kinds of foods, and the other one are just common things you need to think about, common sources and places where you could have some contamination of food. So it's kind of a reminder handout as well. So Mike's can send those to anybody that wants those two handouts.
Great. And this has been recorded, and so it'll show up as a YouTube, and we'll be posting that to the 4-H camp website as well. So Margaret, Sandy, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate your presentation today.
You're welcome.